All right, guys, I'm here in my newly minted Football for Americans series, and I'm here to talk about one of my most favorite soccer players of all time, football players, whatever, Paul Gascoigne. Now, Paul Gascoigne is a very storied player. He has a very crazy history, but there's just something about him that I really love. It's like reading about some kind of, English king or Lord of the Rings thing, some king who fought valiantly but ultimately lost, but everyone remembered him for his grit, his determination, his humor, his charisma, his everything, And that's what I love about Paul Gascoigne. So initially, Paul Gascoigne came from a place called Gateshead in northern England, and it was a kind of a working class, life, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how he grew up. And he was initially, so it's kind of near Newcastle, and he is what you would call a Geordie, actually, Paul Gascoigne. He was sucked into the Newcastle youth system, and he always knew that he was going to be a good footballer. When he was a kid on the playground, he was beating everybody. And apparently there's a story that once when he was in class, when he was a kid, he was signing his name over and over again on a piece of paper, and the teacher was like, "What are you doing?" He was like, "I'm practicing my autograph." The teacher was like, "You'll never make it, professional footballer." Yeah, right, like no one ever makes it at that. And I thought this was a good story. And I think that he had determination in him, but I think it was also he had that impish quality of it was I'm gonna prove you wrong, but not in some kind of angry, boiled my life away revenge, but in a schoolboy, mischievous kind of oh yeah, we'll just wait and see, I'll show you, I could be a footballer, why not, So he's sucked into the Newcastle youth system. He immediately began to make waves. He was young, man. I mean, he was 18, teenagers. He was amazing. The Newcastle faithful loved him. This was a time when I think there was less of that kind of, sports science, nutrition, blah, blah, blah. So he kind of lived like a Newcastle United fan. He loved him some Newcastle brown ale and Mars bars and, these kind of delights, these kind of things that a modern manager certainly would be like, "Oh God, please don't eat that," or "Please don't drink that," that's Jesus Christ. Yeah, 5 Newcastle brown ales, yeah, good job. So, long story short, Paul Gascoigne, he started to get noticed by these other clubs. All these big clubs were starting to take an interest in him. Sir Alex Ferguson took a great interest in him and wanted to sign him for Manchester United, and everything was all set up. And then Sir Alex Ferguson went away on vacation to Spain or something, and he was at the hotel, and the PA system came on and they said "Well, Mr. Ferguson, come to the front desk to receive a phone call." And so he went there, and he heard Paul's gone to Tottenham. And the reason that Paul went to Tottenham was that the club offered not only to sign him and pay him money and everything, but to buy his parents a house, which they did.
I spoke to him the night before I went on holiday. He says, "Mr. Ferguson, you go on holiday, enjoy yourself. I'll be signing for Manchester United." I said, "Oh, great." Went on holidays, went to the swimming pool, tannoy. Mr. Ferguson come to reception. It's Martin Edwards. He says,
the chairman, yeah.
Yeah, Martin, the chairman. He says, "I've got bad news. He's signed for Tottenham." I said, "Oh, God almighty. How could that be?" He says, "Well, apparently that Tottenham have bought his mother and father a house in the northeast, and that swung it."
And this was always one of those what could have beens in his career, because Sir Alex Ferguson was known to sort of be able at times to take players, become a father figure to them, troubled players, whatever players, get them to settle down, get them to be disciplined, blah, blah, blah. And maybe if Ferguson had had that direct effect on his career, things could have been a little different for Paul Gascoigne. I think a lot of people probably feel that way. Gascoigne further grew his legend due to his exploits at the 1990 World Cup, in which, at the tender age of 23, he put in a masterful performance. He played an amazing tournament, dazzling in midfield. Goals, tackles, running back, played with, patriotism, with everything he had. He was giving it to the team and to, I suppose, the nation of England. So anyway, of course, this came to the famous semi-final against West Germany, where England had made it all the way to the semi-final. They'd rode their luck, they'd won some big games, blah, blah, blah. They made it. They were in the semi-final. This is the closest they'd really been to being able to win a World Cup since a long time. Okay, so long story short, they're going to play against West Germany. The game is tight. Germany scores. England scores. It's close, it's close, it's close. This thing is going, to the wire, probably to extra time. Late in the game, Paul Gascoigne, he slides in on this guy, and boom, it's a yellow card. He gets a yellow card, and due to yellow card accumulation because of the ones he had gotten before, if England made it to the final, he wouldn't be able to play. This devastated Paul Gascoigne, absolutely devastated him, and he began to cry on the pitch. And this was like a famous picture of him like picking up his jersey and wiping his eyes like that. And also a famous thing where one of the England players, Gary Lineker, of course, legendary player, goal scorer, everything, he looked at him, he leaned over, and he like did this thing to the coach where he went like this. And he says something to him, and basically he was sort of pointing to the coach, pointing to the sidelines, and basically saying like, give a little check on him because he's lost it. I believe he said he's lost the plot. Like he's crying, he needs to be consoled. Anyway, so of course this was an amazing image that was plastered over every newspaper in England and maybe in the world as well. He was, the valiant warrior who lost at the last second, so to speak. Of course, at the end of after the game was over, they went to penalties, extra time penalties, and then they lost on penalties, and England crashed out in the semifinals. Point being, I guess maybe if they'd still had Paul, who knows who knows what would have happened. Of course, penalties, a lot of times it's 50-50. But basically saying that, they would have missed Paul Gascoigne for the final, but at the same time, Paul Gascoigne, he did everything to get them there. His charisma, his grit, his character, his everything. So anyway, this of course made him extremely famous in England. Then he has this transfer to Tottenham. He's doing extremely well. Now on the club level, he did another amazing thing in the semi-final of the 1991 FA Cup, which especially at that time, FA Cup was way more popular, way more of a big prize for them. Tottenham, they're fighting for the FA Cup. They're in the semi-final. They're playing against Arsenal. They're arch rivals, so there you go. There's another thing that's a North London derby. Insane game. Arsenal is amazing at the time, of course. Paul Gascoigne, he lines up this free kick. It's one of the best free kicks I've ever seen. And on top of that, I love the commentator. He literally says, is he gonna have a crack? He is, schoolboys out and stuff here. I bet even he can't believe it.
Mabbutt has gone forward with Stewart to the right, Lineker and Howes to the left. Is Gascoigne gonna have a crack? He is, Oh, no! Brilliant! Is there anything left from this man to surprise us? That was one of the finest free kicks that this stadium has ever seen. Seaman got his hands, couldn't hold.
And this commentator is amazing. And the shot from Paul Gascoigne, I totally agree. You make it up on the schoolyard, shoot from shoot from that far out and think you're gonna score and actually score, drain it, is unbelievable. So anyway, Tottenham makes it to the semi-final, or makes it to the final of the FA Cup. And then here's where Paul Gascoigne's kind of his other side of his character comes into play. He's kind of exuberant. He does a crazy tackle on this guy called Gary Charles. He tears up his ACL, his knee, whatever. He's done. He's stretched off the game. Tottenham actually ended up winning the game, but Paul Gascoigne, it was this is a very bad injury. You will be out for a long time. And even if you think back then too, they knew how to do it, but it wasn't the same today with that kind of arthroscopic knee surgery and had that intense amount of money and stuff that's been put towards sports science and the ability to save people's careers in that way. Anyway, this is 1991. So now Paul Gascoigne's out, and also a ton of personal problems and things come out. He's known to go out drinking. He's known to cause trouble, pranks. Some of it's appreciated, some of it is not. He's overweight, he's this, he's that, he loved gambling. I'm sure he was doing probably some drugs. At the same time, I can't help but feel that was the thing about Paul Gascoigne. It was sort of cursed and blessed at the same time, in a sense of that was his character, that exuberant guy. I don't think the guy could sit still. He had to be doing something, you know what I mean? And I think he took that with his play. He played like a kid in the park, you know what I mean? He was never gonna be the guy that was gonna just be so, tactical and so professional about it. It was when he was inspired, he played. He was like an artist, right? Classic, of course, cliche. Anyway, the injury, of course, was a huge blow to Gascoigne and somewhat soured his time at Tottenham. In addition, the club fell into a bit of financial trouble, and as Gascoigne was one of their best assets, he was put up for sale to Lazio. And at that time, Serie A was definitely considered to be one of the better leagues. Although, at the time, he transferred to Lazio, which is the blue half of Rome, the other team in Rome. he was not like, Lazio was not really that great, you know? They were decent, but they weren't that great. And so it was kind of interesting in that sense too. But so anyway, he went there. Italian fans loved him. They greeted him at the airport, like an insane welcome. They absolutely, Gaza, Gaza, they loved Gaza, right? And he, one thing that, again, like always, with his passion and his humanity, he was able to understand the, you know, the politics and the tribalism of, you know, Italian football. And of course he had some trouble following him and things were following him along that, but he actually played well in Italy and was considered to be kind of a success in perhaps Lazio's most important game of the season, the Derby della Capitale against their bitter rivals Roma. Gascoigne wrote his name into Lazio's history books by scoring a dramatic headed equalizer. And he ran to the fans, he thanked them, everything. He cried. Once again, his emotions overcame him, and even though he was from the north of England and didn't know much about Italy and whatever, and the Italian fans didn't know much about him in a sense, he knew the passion of that and he cried, and for that, the Lazio fans absolutely loved him. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows in Lazio. He was definitely, you know, again, caused trouble. There was injuries, and the club at times, they were very like strict, you know what I mean? And it was like, you have to eat this and you have to do this. Again, more of that sports science type stuff. And Paul Gascoigne was kind of always, you know, up and down with that type of stuff, you know, and was always kind of, you know, I don't know, causing trouble. In one particular incident at Lazio, he caused a great stir when a reporter posed a question to him while he was walking in public. Instead of answering, Gascoigne simply burped into the microphone. This caused a great deal of controversy, as some felt it was disrespectful and not simply a childish prank or, you know, bit of fun, as Gascoigne would have seen it. He also had one of those, like the money manager, assistant type person. She wrote like a tabloid book about him, kind of like a, you know, a sort of grimy tell-all about him, and that really affected him, his trust, blah, blah, blah. So once things in Italy kind of went bad, he actually ended up going to Scotland, and he played for Rangers. And he was actually really good at Rangers and revived his career under Walter Smith, who was a very strict disciplinarian and perhaps was good for Paul to be able to play for Rangers. Paul Gascoigne, like, he did very well actually in Scotland, and in typical Paul Gascoigne style, was not without controversy. He did this thing to draw the ire of the Celtic fans. So he scored in the derby between Celtic and Rangers. Long story short, of course, the derby is, part of it is split along a religious lines in that Celtic fans are Catholic and Rangers fans are Protestant. The players perhaps cheekily told Paul, go over and do this flute celebration if he scored, to the Celtic fans. And so of course he did it, and it caused a huge amount of controversy because it was seen as a kind of like supporting of sectarian violence. Anyway, point being that this is what made the fans so mad, and it was kind of seen as like an iconic Paul Gascoigne moment of him being like, you know, kind of cheeky, kind of controversial, kind of on the edge. So now he's done well at Rangers. Again, it's in the Scottish League, so it's not top, but it's good. It's definitely very, very good. He proved he still had some, you know, magic in the old silk hat, despite personal problems and this, that, and the third. His career is kind of coming to an end. With England, he really hasn't been that great with England. Now, Euro 96, England hosts it, okay? So they're the home team. They've got a decent squad of players, some really young new guys with Alan Shearer and all these types of people coming in, and then they're in a game against Scotland, and it's a famous, you know, it was important for England to win this game, whatever, but what was more important was the magic that Paul Gascoigne pulled. Dude gets the ball back, kicks it, like, all the way up the field. Paul Gascoigne takes it down, he faces off against the Scottish defender. The ball comes down to him, like he controls it for 1 second, then he kicks it over the head of the Scottish defender, gets it on the other side, boom, slots it home for an absolutely beautiful goal. He runs to the sideline, basically, kind of like by the goalkeeper where there's like the extra water bottles, you know, that they keep. He flops down on the floor like this, spreads out, and all the players come over to him. They grab the water bottles and they spray the water into Paul Gascoigne's mouth. Oh, and by the way, he bleached his hair blonde. Anyway, so they spray the water into his mouth. This was a reference to the fact that previously England had been on like a sort of trip doing some friendlies, and they went to Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, they went to this bar, and part of the appeal of the bar was they had this thing called a dentist chair, an old dentist chair where you would lean back like this, and they would pour, liquor in your mouth, and that was the idea. So the England team, they went out, lads night out, and they went to this bar. They did this. Some paparazzi took pictures of them. There was pictures of Paul Gascoigne like all drunk, dancing around, all this stuff, and the tabloids like slammed them, and they were particularly harsh in their criticism towards Gascoigne. So this celebration after scoring this amazing goal was like an FU to the tabloids for basically like getting after us about having, a lads night out, what's the big deal kind of thing. Anyway, whatever. So then Paul Gascoigne, he left, and then he went to Middlesbrough, again, not that great, okay, but he was playing in the Premier League there at the end of his career, but this was like late 90s. He definitely, he didn't necessarily take care of himself, and he had a lot of personal problems and all this type of stuff, so you never knew what you were getting from him. He went to Everton, but it was like not that great, it was okay. Basically, this kind of rounds out Paul Gascoigne's career. He went to China and like whatever, and I think he played for a non-league side. And anyway, since his retirement, he's kind of been like a bit of a crazy guy, a cautionary tale maybe a little bit. He's had a lot of different troubles and rehabs and personal problems and this, that, and the third. In a weird case, there was this famous criminal from the north of England who he went on the run from the police and they had like a standoff. And actually, Paul Gascoigne called the police and was like, I know this guy from growing up. Let me get a chance to talk him down. Let me hostage negotiate with him. I know him and I can talk to him and help him. The police turned it down, but I still thought it was an insane part of Paul Gascoigne's legend. Anyway, he retired. He's still around. He's still alive. He definitely looks a little worse for wear. I say all this with an open heart. I'm not here to criticize Paul Gascoigne. I know that he's like a genuine, a good, imperfect human like all of us. He's fought valiantly. Yeah, he's definitely made some big screw ups, you know what I mean? No denying that. But I think overall, he's an absolutely amazing soccer legend. And I think, like I said in the very beginning of this video, I think the thing that makes him so great, it's he's one of the great kings of England or something who fought valiantly and died on the field of, battle. And I think that's what makes him so cool. He's made some amazing moments, and yeah, a great drunken mystic, a kind of, you know what I mean? Like that classic tale of blessed with insane talent, but kind of maybe all got too much for him or burned him out. But anyway, yeah, so that's my story about Paul Gascoigne, and he's one of my favorite soccer players of all time.